Morning everyone and welcome to the latest edition of On the Whistle, where we have yet another Sunderland comeback win to talk about. 4 games in a row now, Sunderland have fallen behind first, and fair play to them, they've managed to win 3 of those and take a point from the other. I think it's fair to say we would like to see them make faster starts in games, but I think that tells you a lot about the character and resilience, to be fair, and also the quality, of course, to the players in the group. So a 2-1 win over Norwich City yesterday, goals from Dan Ballard and Jobe after Anis Slimani opened the scoring for Norwich City. I have to say that it was a scrappy game than I'd anticipated, and I think, to be honest, I thought Sunderland were well short of their best, albeit in tricky conditions. I think that was a long way from the best performance we've seen from Sunderland, either sort of at home or away this season. And to be fair, the first half, I was impressed with Norwich. I thought that they were quite brave at times in the way they played out from the back, and I thought that they did it well. I think you could sense through most of the first half that Sunderland's press wasn't quite working. Norwich were just a bit sharper, a bit quicker. They were playing through that kind of press and they were finding some space on the break. I think you've got to give them a lot of credit for that. We've seen teams like, Sheffield Wednesday being one obvious example, who've really struggled to play through Sunderland's press and who Sunderland blew away inside the opening half an hour. I thought Norwich came with quite a sort of brave strategy, and for a while it paid off for them. I thought that Sunderland didn't really get going. I think the fact that they didn't have a shot on target in the first half was a fair reflection of, Norwich weren't necessarily creating chance after chance. Anthony Patterson obviously made one really, really good save shortly before Norwich's opening goal, but it wasn't like he was too involved. But I thought Norwich were having the better of the game and they felt very comfortable and very happy with where they were at half-time. I thought we immediately saw an improvement, of course, and I'm not just saying that because Sunderland scored a goal after half-time. I thought the energy was better, they were more aggressive. From speaking to Regis Lebris and Luke O'Nien after the game, doesn't sound like there was anything particularly dramatic said in the dressing room at half-time. I think it was just a bit of an honest chat about the fact that Sunderland hadn't really imposed themselves on the game, that the quality hadn't been good enough. And I think the quite clear message from Lebris was, look, it was up to us. It's purely up to us and what we do, whether we turn this game around. And I think, to be fair, although the second half wasn't really a vintage performance, I thought it was much better, and you always felt after Ballard's goal that Sunderland were the more likely team to go on and win it. Interestingly, speaking to the Norwich City boss, who spoke really well after the game, he sort of said that he felt one of the main things, and I thought this was quite interesting from a Sunderland perspective, was that he felt his team had much better control of the first half. Something that I spoke about, the way they played through the press, the way that they really struggled to stop Sunderland. And they were one of those teams who were quite brave in playing out from the back, but when they lost the ball, they retreated very quickly into their low block. And I think you could see that Sunderland was struggling to sort of play through that. His view was that the second half became too open. He was really frustrated that his team lost control. He almost felt, reading between the lines, that they got sucked into an open game where Sunderland's wide players suddenly had space, where it was about 1v1 duels. And it was interesting him saying that he felt that Sunderland clearly had the advantage in that kind of game. Quite interesting, I think, because there was a time when we were talking about Sunderland as technically very, very strong team, but maybe who were physically a little bit lacking at this level. I think what we're beginning to see now, that is no longer the case with players like Ballard, Mepham, O'Nien, very obviously, Jobe in midfield, Dan Neil, that part of his game is improving so much, even Isidore up front. So yeah, interesting sort of listening to both the managers talk through the game and what changed after half-time. I think, if we're brutally honest, it felt from pretty early on like it was going to be a game where the referee was going to have a massive say. I thought the officiating was quite erratic throughout, unpredictable decision making. I felt he'd lost control of the game about midway through the first half. And I think it felt in the second half like there was always going to be a decision that potentially decided the game. I don't think you can have any complaints with the actual second yellow that they were shown to Jose Cordoba, and actually the Norwich City boss after the game in his post-match press conference said he had no issues with that decision whatsoever. It was some of the other decisions. I think, to be honest, I think both teams could point to a lot of decisions through the game that they felt were unusual or incorrect. So I think Sunderland kind of got the rub of the green on that one, in terms of, I think the big decision was always going to be made to affect the game, and it just so happened that that it fell in Sunderland's favour. And actually, Norwich responded fairly well to going behind in front of 10 men. Obviously, a big save from Anthony Patterson to tip Ashley Barnes' shot onto the post to protect the 3 points. So not a vintage Sunderland performance. There was certainly no attempts to overhype it from Regis Lebris. Afterwards, he said he had kind of a balanced feeling after the game because he knew that the performance wasn't great, but he also said, look, winning is the most important thing. It's not always about tactics. It's sometimes about character and mentality. And I think what we've seen in the last few weeks is that Sunderland have a lot of that. And I think Jobe embodies that, his mentality. I think is first rate, and yeah, really good to see him back on the goal trail as well. I think he's been going through a little period where obviously this season he's playing a little bit deeper. He has more defensive responsibilities out of possession than he did last season when he was either playing up front or as a very attacking number 10. He's playing more as an 8 this year, and out of possession he basically turns into a 6 next to Dan Neil pretty much. And I think there's been a period of adjustment where he's been trying to balance that with trying to sort of have that, getting those goal scoring areas where he was so effective last season. And hopefully, albeit his goal yesterday came from a set piece, hopefully over the last couple of weeks, some signs that he's finding ways to sort of crash the box again and get into those really close range areas where we've seen that actually he's got a real goal scoring knack, which is a pretty priceless commodity in this division, as we all know. So yeah, really important win, if not a brilliant performance, but that's okay. Sometimes in the Championship, we all know it can be a real grind. So I'm going to get into your questions now because there's plenty of them. Thanks so much for sending them in. We'll have a few minutes chatting through these. I'm just going to have a little sip of coffee before I do so. So we've got a question from Zeus Steelix. Thanks for sending another question in. Always good to hear from you. Who says, what do you think was changed at half-time to spur us on to win? To me, it seemed like we pushed up higher and were more aggressive in the press second half. Also, 10 points won from losing positions in the last 4 games shows great resilience in the team to bounce back. Yeah, I think everyone would agree with that. As point, as we said, ideally, Sunderland will stop conceding sort of sloppy goals early in games. When I spoke to Dan Neil after Swansea, he said they'd had a conversation in the dressing room where they'd said, you know, that the comeback win was brilliant and credit to us for kind of almost producing that, but we also need to start games faster because it will catch up with us eventually. I think the dressing room are under no illusions that they can't keep giving a team head start in games. So yes, brilliant that they were able to dig it out yesterday, but I definitely think it's a big sort of thing behind the scenes where they know they can't keep giving teams an advantage, especially not with sloppy goals like set-piece goals. But as you say, you know, great resilience, I think, in the group. I think we've all seen that all these players are playing pretty much from minute 1 to 90 and giving everything for the shirt. And, you know, I know that some supporters will say that's the main thing they always ask for, so great to see that. In terms of half-time, as I mentioned this, I don't think it was a huge sort of tactical thing, really. It sounds like it was just a bit of an honest chat about, you know, how someone had kind of fallen short of their levels, maybe some small tactical details, but nothing particularly significant. I have to say as well, it sounds like simplistic analysis. I do think the conditions are a big factor. I don't think it's a coincidence that the wind was blowing towards the north stand and that the team who was sort of attacking in that direction was in the ascendancy in both halves. I thought it was a fairly significant factor in the game. I think you could see at times in the first half with Anthony Patterson, he really struggled with his kicking because of the conditions. I think you could see that Sunderland struggled to get up the pitch as fluently as they normally do. I do think it was a bit of a factor. I think the fact that Sunderland had the wind in the second half helped them get a little bit higher up the pitch, as you mentioned, and maybe put Norwich under a bit more pressure on the ball than they'd been able to in the first half. So I don't think, whereas at Swansea, it sounds like, as I explained on the last video, there was a specific tactical issue that they had to address. I don't think it was as clear as that this week. I think there were maybe some small details. But I think it was just almost taking a breather and just sort of acknowledging that they'd fallen short of what they can do and sort of putting that right. And obviously, you know, goals change games massively. I think to score so quickly after half-time completely changed the complexion of the game. It always felt like it was going to be a tall task from Norwich from there, and that was even before the red card, as I mentioned. A couple of questions on the ref. Shiny Tom says, not really into ref bashing as it's a very hard job, but this game seemed too big for the ref today. Most of our bookings were self-inflicted with a lot of petulance, but he was incredibly inconsistent and we won despite him. It was obvious both teams weren't finishing with 11 men. Josh says, is that the worst refereeing performance for both sides in brackets in decades? Look, yeah, we don't talk much about the referees on the whistle or even really too much over on the echo because I think it's an incredibly difficult job, and as Labrie said afterwards, it's very easy to do in hindsight to make decisions in real time at sort of full speed. It was much more challenging, so I think we always have to acknowledge that. But I do think that you never want the referee to be a key actor in the game, is how I would describe it. And yesterday I felt like he was probably the most influential person on the pitch in terms of the game, which is not where you want the game to be. And I thought some of the decision making was, as I say, inconsistent for both sides, as is rightly being pointed out there. I think Norwich can feel aggrieved as well, not so much with the actual second yellow card, because as I said, I thought that was the right decision. But I thought the general standard of refereeing for both sides, I think, was too inconsistent. I don't think there was the level of control you want to see over the game. So for sure a big factor, and I think having played so well in the first half and showed what they can do as a team, I think Norwich will be leaving feeling pretty aggrieved themselves, and I can totally understand that. Ian says, can we put to bed this awful crack of Jobe is only rated because of his brother? Lad is an absolute Rolls Royce of a player and is just getting better and better. Also, unbelievable resilience from the lads. Last 4 games, go behind, win 3, draw 1, as we've discussed before. Completely agree. Yeah, I think the Jobe thing, I think that was more of a last season thing. I think where you could see specifically outside of Sunderland, there was a lot more chat of he's only kind of rated because of his brother. I think that what we're seeing this season is, I think, as you rightly point out, Jobe is now... We all kind of knew watching Jobe last year that there was something very, very special there. As we mentioned, particularly his goal scoring in a team in the second half of last season that was doing very poorly. We could see there was really something special of his own. There were definitely at times when his performance levels dipped, where a lot of us felt that he maybe needed a rest, probably inevitably in his first season in professional football. But I think that we all knew that player was there, and I think maybe outside there was that perception that, maybe it's not just about, maybe it's because of the name why he's getting this hype. I think what we're seeing this season is, I think everybody, outside Sunderland is starting to see, who watches the Championship, that Jobe is a special player in his own right for his age, his mentality, his athleticism. I think you see it week in, week out. Now, the last 10-15 minutes of games, he's always one of the strongest players on the pitch, which I think is remarkable when you consider he's basically playing every minute. I know he had a short break when he had that suspension, but otherwise he's been ever present. And I think that's something that really marks him out. But I think you also see his mentality is really top draw. And the big thing, as I said before, is there's not many players, whether it's actual strikers or midfielders, who have a knack of being in the right place to score goals. We haven't seen that as much from Jobe this season because he's been adjusting, as I said, to that slightly more withdrawn role. But now that he's starting to put that back into his game as well, I think we're talking about a really unique player. I've said it before, my personal opinion is I think Sunderland are going to have to get promoted this year if they want to keep Jobe, because I think that the bids and the calibre of club who are going to be looking to sign him next summer if Sunderland don't go up, I think is going to be pretty significant. Obviously, that's looking a long way ahead. But yeah, I think that is starting to change. I think the perception outside of Sunderland is starting to change. I think people are starting to wake up to how good Jobe is on his own 2 feet. We completely agree with you. Absolute Rolls Royce for player, getting better and better. I think he's really stepped up this season, and I actually think it's easy to forget how young he is because of the stature that he's sort of performing with every week. So, what else have we got? My friends from the German Black Cats, morning the German Black Cats, how lovely to hear from you. Thanks for sending your question in. It says, good morning, Phil. Is Mienda the better striker option at the moment? Will we sign a striker in January? Yeah, so it's a really interesting. I mean, I have to be honest, I really like Wilson Isidore. I know that he's now, I think it's 6 or 7 games without a goal. Don't have the exact number at hand, so apologies for that, but it's 6 or 7. I think that the situation is completely different to last season, to be honest, where I felt like Sunderland strikers weren't making any impression on the game. It wasn't just that they weren't scoring goals, it was they weren't getting chances, they weren't contributing to the build-up play, they weren't contributing to the out-of-possession press. I really like Wilson Isidore because I think that no matter what, you get a certain level of performance out of him, whether or not he's scoring goals, and that is harrying the opposition defenders, making runs into the channel. Don't forget, it was a really nice little touch to tee up Mienda for the cross back to Ballard to score the equalising goal. That was from Isidore. Yes, he missed his big chance, which he should have scored, and he'll be so frustrated he didn't when he ran through on goal. But again, good centre-forward play to spot the opportunity and sort of streak clear. I like Isidore, and I think the most significant thing is you don't need to worry too much about my opinion, do you? But Lebris loves him. And yet again, after the game yesterday, said it's just a matter of time. The goal is coming. I like what Isidore brings to the team all round. He's a really important part of what I do. Couldn't have been more clear in his backing of Isidore. You can read the quotes over on the Sunderland Echo website. So to be honest, I don't see that changing too much anytime soon, albeit Isidore can't play every single game over the festive period. It's too much, so he will have to be rested at some point. What you do then, I think the reality is at the moment, I think Mienda's too important out wide. Really liked Elijah Mienda's performance yesterday. I thought he was by a distance Sunderland's best player in the first half. I know he can be frustrating because it doesn't always come off, but I think his ability consistently to get past players, to open up space, I think is really unique. I love that he just keeps going through games, keeps always trying to make things happen. A really good performance, and I thought he was unlucky not to score today. You can see how dangerous he is through in the middle when sort of the game breaks open and he's got space to run into behind the opposition defence. But I think he's doing well out wide, and I think with the injury situation as it is, I think he's too important to move from those kind of wide positions. So I think Easter will continue for now. Interestingly, I asked Lebris about Aaron Connolly on Thursday, and he spoke really well about him, described how when he came into the club, obviously after a really difficult time, he sort of had a really, really strong start, which obviously culminated in that goal against Millwall. Reading between the lines a little bit, I think Lebris then feels as if there was a little bit of a dip which maybe explains why we haven't seen too much of him of late. But what he also said was he's had a really good sort of week, 10 days recently in training where he'd been really impressed with Connolly and feels he's getting back to that level that he saw from him when he first came into the club. So I think that's probably one to watch. As I say, Isidore can't play every game over the festive period. It's going to be too much. People forget he's still quite a young player himself and hasn't played a huge amount of football in his career really, albeit he's a lot more experienced than some of the players in the Sunderland squad. So I do think there'll be a bit of rotation at some point, and I do think we'll see Connolly. I wouldn't be surprised to see him get a start at some point over the Christmas period with Mienda out on the wings. Jan Paveda's back, but it sounds like he'll be a while away from starting the game. He'll be used as an impact sub. So yeah, I think I don't think there's any doubt that Lebris is going to stick with Isidore, albeit there might be a little bit of rotation at some point. So hopefully that answers your question a little bit. David Palmer, thanks for your question, David, says, hi Phil, Adil Al-Shish has produced some canny cameos as sub recently. Keeps possession, has a good footballing brain late in the game when we need a cool head. He can pick a pass too, so I'd be disappointed if we moved him on in January. Do you agree? Yes and no. I totally agree with you. I thought that was an excellent cameo yet again from him yesterday. I thought he was exactly as you put it perfectly, David. I don't need to add too much more. Cool head, picked good passes, relieved a bit of pressure at times. I think credit to Lebris, because when he first came on in that left wing role, as we spoke about a couple of weeks ago, I felt like Al-Shish was on a bit of a hiding to nothing. I think we're now starting to see in action that it's not a bad position for him. It's actually really working as an impact substitute. And again, he had a good impact yesterday. I still expect him to go in January, David. And to be honest, while I agree with you in the sense that it would be disappointing, I think you have to be fair to Adil. 3, 5, 10-minute cameos at the end of games, every other games. It's just not enough. This is a guy who's played fairly regularly in the top tier in France. If at this stage of his career, that's just not enough football. And unfortunately, I don't see him kind of pushing his way into the starting 11 anytime soon, because it's clear that Lebris doesn't want to play him in one of those central roles. And I think that's obviously his position. I think ultimately, I don't think you can stand in his way if there's a decent bid comes in January, whether it's loan or it's permanent for him to go and play. I do have a slight reservation at the moment in terms of there aren't loads of options in Sunderland's squad. So at the moment, he would be a big miss because he's one of the few players who you can trust to impact the game coming off the bench. But I think once January starts, Paveda's had a few minutes. Crucially, you'll have Romain Mundle and Alan Brown coming back to fitness. I don't think Al-Shish is going to play much football because I think the kind of pecking order there is very clear from what Lebris did in the start of the season. So I'll agree with you, David. I think he deserves a lot of credit for what he's done. I really like him as a player. I really do. But I think it's right to let him go in January for his sake. I don't think it would be fair to stand in his way and sort of limit him to 5 minutes here and there, potentially even less, like I say, when players like Mundle come back. So move on to the last couple of questions. Safa Mackham says, great win, important win. Couple of points, we can't continue to go goals down. It will bite us one day. Yeah, spoke about that earlier. Definitely true, and I think something that Sunderland are well aware of. Also says, Patterson nearly cost us with his messing about at the back. He has supporters' hearts in their mouths sometimes. Yeah, the only thing I would say to that is, that's the way Patterson's been asked to play. I think sometimes you've got to, yes, it can be risky. Sometimes it can sort of have all of us with our hearts in our mouths, but I think it's important to note that isn't sort of Patterson's decision making. That is very clearly the way he has been asked to play by the coaching staff as well. So you've got to, it would be wrong to focus purely on Patterson for that, because that's a team decision, it's a coaching decision rather than necessarily his decision. And I think, to be fair, we all knew when he came into the team that Patterson's strengths are his shot stopping and his command of his box, which I know sometimes there's a debate around that, but for me, watching the Championship every week, I think there are a few goalkeepers who are more aggressive than him coming off his line for corners and set plays and crosses. I don't think distribution was ever a huge strength of his coming through the ranks. It's something he's learning on the job, and I think he's got a lot better. Always room for improvement. Yesterday was tricky in the blustery conditions. I mentioned that earlier. I do think that's something you have to consider, especially in the first half. And then Paul says, is Leo Yelder the best sub of all time? Well, Leo's excellent record of helping seeing out games continues. He's made 5 appearances off the bench in the Championship this season. Sunderland have held on to 4 wins, and they also held on to the draw at QPR, which you remember was a good result because they were down to 10 men for much of the game after Jobe got sent off. I thought it was interesting bringing this up because it'd be really interesting to see what happens with Yelder in January, because as I've said before, I can't stress enough how popular Leo Yelder is in the dressing room. He's a big character, and the players love him. He's a huge presence in that dressing room. Lebris really likes him. He made him captain for a few games in pre-season. He made him captain for that Carabao Cup game at Preston at the start of the season. Rates and trusts him, and you can see that in the way he brings him on in important moments of the game. Having said that, Yelder's a youth international. He'll have big aspirations for his career, and I can't imagine he is satisfied, a bit like I said with Al-Shish, with a few minutes here and there. So I do wonder if he'll want to go out and play somewhere, but it's going to be interesting because while a lot of those players who aren't getting minutes, Abdullah Bar and Azari Russin, I think it's a bit of a foregone conclusion that it's the right time for him to go in January. I'm not sure what will happen with Yelda, just because I know that Labrise has a lot of trust and also rates him really highly as a player. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that one develops in January. I thought he did well yesterday, but I'm not sure. It's hard to see a route into the team with him when everyone's fit defensively. And obviously, as I say, I think a player of his kind of career so far and where he wants to go, I think it's hard to ask him to play a few minutes here and there. So let's see how that one goes. I think that's it. I've been speaking again for a long time. My apologies. I seem to be making this video longer every single week. I'll try and work on that. Over the festive period, there's going to be stacks of stuff on the Sunderland Echo. So if at any point over the festivities you need a quiet 5-10 minutes to sit with your phone or your laptop and read something, go over to the Sunderland Echo website, because the football section will have loads of Sunderland stuff there for you to read. But yeah, I just wanted to say this will be the last On the Whistle before, obviously, I'll be back after the Boxing Day game against Blackburn Rovers. So I just wanted to wish you all and a very, very Merry Christmas to you and your loved ones. I hope you have a really festive and peaceful time. And yeah, I'll see you after the Blackburn game with another edition of On the Whistle. Merry Christmas.